They believed they were fighting for democracy.
This is a big whistleblowing movement.
It is like you're together doing something great and take down a regime and establish a new regime.
Their inspiration was a fugitive real estate tycoon living in New York City. Guo Wengui once rubbed shoulders with members of China's political elite. But he's now a wanted man in his homeland, accused of corruption, bribery and rape, charges he denies.
Take down the CCP! Take down the CCP!
Since leaving China, Guo's found himself some new allies, new followers and a new mission.
Yeah!
He built himself a larger-than-life character, and the people fall for it.
It's really close to an evil cult.
Now, a growing number of Guo's former supporters are speaking up. They say they've been misled, cheated and harassed.
Once you're brainwashed, you're not able to think and you're not able to be rational.
就是一帮骗子，以反共、以灭共为口号的骗子。
101 East investigates.
All right, we are in Washington. I got to be a tour guide today.
We begin by meeting Sasha Gong. A former political prisoner in China, Gong left for the United States in 1987. She's now a citizen here.
This is the heart of our democracy.
Gong was once chief of the Mandarin service at the broadcaster Voice of America. But she lost that job after this interview in 2017.
I did my research. I said, wow, I need to interview this guy. If you want to grant us an interview, I will do that.
Real estate mogul Guo Wengui, or Miles Kwok, had fled China in 2014. Months after his departure, authorities there arrested this man, Spy Chief Ma Jian, once the powerful Vice Minister for State Security and arguably Guo's most important ally. Ma is now serving a life sentence for corruption.
We know from many sources that security and business have been mingling for decades. And we never found anyone who's willing to talk to the public on this.
Hours before the interview, a Chinese government spokesperson said this.
据我们了解，国际刑警组织已经向犯罪嫌疑人郭文贵发出了红色的通缉令，也就是红色通报。
Chinese officials had also contacted Voice of America 2 days prior to the interview to demand its cancellation. Still, it went ahead as scheduled. The interview was supposed to last 3 hours. But 80 minutes in, after Guo had made several explosive, though mostly unverifiable allegations, Sasha Gong received a directive from Voice of America management.
See, you hear my voice. I said, 到这里停止了.
Was he upset after that?
No, he was not. He was very happy. The interview was not the big news. The cutoff is the big news. He was so happy for that.
The interview disruption was widely reported. Voice of America insisted that the decision to pull the plug was based on journalistic principles and not influenced by Beijing or the US government. But for many in the overseas Chinese community, there could only be one explanation.
I think this man must be telling the truth. That's why Chinese government is so unhappy with the interview. 喂，你好。
John Pan migrated from China to Australia in 2010. For years, he led a quiet life as a computer engineer. But then he discovered Guo Wengui.
At that time, I think, I've been fired up. It's full of passion inside of me. Finally, we can change China from a totalitarian regime to a democracy.
Pan started live streaming on Twitter and YouTube, hoping to amplify and defend Guo's views. Over time, he built up a sizable audience. Thousands tuned in, including the man who first inspired him.
And he gave me a formal invitation by WhatsApp messages. You come to New York visiting us, and every cost on me.
In New York City, Zhuang Lihong is also reflecting on his experience with Guo Wengui, an activist who fled China for the US in 2014. Zhuang says he was once part of Guo's inner circle.
快到了，快到那个郭文贵的这个楼下了。
Guo lives in a penthouse on the 18th floor of this luxury apartment block overlooking Central Park. In 2017, following his appearance on Voice of America, groups of protesters started showing up outside Guo's building. They insisted he was a criminal who should be repatriated to China.
我觉得作为一个被中共迫害的一个反共人士，不应该在美国遭到这样的对待。所以呢，我就觉得我必须要来声援他。
Zhuang started organizing counter-protests, often live streaming the events on social media. On one occasion at least, things turned ugly. But Zhuang persisted, and one afternoon, Guo made a surprise appearance. There would be many more meetings to come. Guo had plans for his so-called whistleblower movement, and he needed as much help as he could get.
爆料革命这个口号呢，是郭文贵喊出来的。他一开始就是以这种爆料的形式，来让人家认为这个爆的料能够对共产党一些高层官员起到一个打击的作用。
大家都烦了，都累了，文贵能在几个月。
At first, much of the action took place online on Guo's Twitter account and YouTube channel. Guo would make various allegations about high-ranking members of the CCP. Supporters would then amplify his message via their own social media accounts. But many of Guo's claims were difficult or impossible to verify.
这是很奇怪的一个问题，因为当时郭文贵在宣传的时候，他受到中共的打压，很多的负面消息都是共产党故意放出来的，所以你也没有办法去证实和证伪，所以干脆就屏蔽掉了。
In November 2018, Guo launched a new initiative with former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon.
He is setting up and going to establish a $100 million fund called the Rule of Law Fund.
The fund's aim, they said, was to expose corruption in China and help victims of government persecution. Bannon was to be its chair.
Steve Bannon standing next to him, you trust him. To lots of Chinese who grow up under authoritarian government, the Chinese one, well, someone who served in the administration means power.
Become one of the largest financial companies in the world.
Gong would go on to join Bannon on the board of the Rule of Law Society. She says she agreed only because he asked.
I only attended 2 meetings. As a board member, you have a duty to oversee especially finance. I want to see the financial records. Not giving, I feel very uncomfortable. So I resigned.
Tax documents show that in 2019, the Rule of Law Foundation raised some $4 million. It's not clear if Guo himself contributed any of the $100 million he'd earlier pledged. But many of his supporters heeded his call to donate.
一开始我就捐了200块，后来 又捐了100，但是实际上这个法治基金没有如郭文贵之前所说的那样子做到了这个法治基金成立的原则。来，我们先来拍个照片来。
But in June 2019, Zhuang was still a believer in the cause. And so was John Pan. He was finally in New York on a mission to upgrade Guo's live stream facilities.
He hosts me there for 5 days, and I visit his office every day, and almost working there about 18 hours per day. I rarely have a sleep that 5 days.
Oh my God, my guy! I love this guy.
Footage live streamed by Pan on day 1 shows Guo introducing his 2 supporters to Steve Bannon. They would see more of him in the days that followed.
When I see Steve Bannon and Miles Squawk together, I realize that Steve Bannon is not the leader.
Middle one?
Yeah. Steve Bannon is Miles' student.
We're at the world headquarters of Guo Media.
This is Guo Media.
Guo Media.
This could be the reason why. A company linked to Guo was paying Bannon at least $1 million for strategic consulting services. Bannon did not respond to our request for an interview. 6 months after his trip to New York, John Pan announced plans for a charity to support human rights in Hong Kong and Xinjiang. Guo live-streamed this response.
你就是诈骗！你有什么能力捐款呢？你有什么能力经营这个组织啊？没有爆料革命，谁认识你呀？说我跟爆料革命没关系，你放屁你！
Maybe he thinks me as a competitor with his Rule of Law Foundation. And then after he's bullying me online about 7 days, I end up to the emergency. I call 000 because during that couple of days, I barely sleep. I can't eat.
Months later, dozens of protesters showed up outside Pan's house in Australia.
They say me, John Pan, is a spy. He's working for Chinese government. He's leaking our information, handle this information to Chinese government. The protest against me is not the first one. Anyone who criticized him and been named as a thief, a fake democracy activist, it will be a target.
Zhuang also became a target. Trouble started brewing after he agreed to work full-time as Guo's broadcast manager. He lasted just 2.5 months.
或许郭文贵认为我知道的比较多，他就突然之间就对我进行攻击了。
The company that hired Zhuang accused him of stealing equipment, damaging furniture, and breaching a confidentiality agreement. It sued him for at least $500,000. The case was dismissed, but Zhuang's troubles were not yet over.
他们以这种在民主社会的示威活动，来对我进行了中国式的文革打压。
This went on for more than 20 days. In the end, Zhuang and his family were forced to move.
Guo Wengui intentionally kicks out his supporters because he wants to use this to gain more loyalty, like a brutal dictator like Stalin, Mao Zedong.
It wasn't just Guo's former supporters who were getting harassed. Teng Biao is a widely respected Chinese dissident and legal scholar now living in the United States. He's also a vocal critic of Guo, publicly questioning the truth of his statements and credentials.
So they came here every day in the morning, standing from here to all the way there. Yeah.
CCP virus. CCP spy. CCP run dog.
They cursed me with the dirtiest words, so I tried to avoid engagement in them. But I know many of them are the true believers. They regard Guo Wengui as a god.
Filmmaker He Yang spent weeks documenting the protests outside Tang Biao's house. He too faced abuse and harassment.
那你为什么要拍我们呢？你在公共场合当然可以拍。我们也没有你那里。别拍，别拍，告诉你别拍。不是，这狗男的，你没骂狗就是啊。
没有一个人天生这么邪恶的去站在人家门口去骂人家的，当着孩子的面去辱骂。我想一个正常人，一个精神正常的人绝对不会做这样的事情。他们是怎么样的去进入这样的一种状态，这就是值得深思。
所有的设备，所有的吃喝，所有的车马流行。
To find out what motivated the protesters, we meet Guo Wengui, a former leader of such protests who has since fallen out with Guo.
我提供给你们的这些所有的这些 WhatsApp 的语音啊，这些东西，你们都可以往出放，这个不要紧。这个他如果郭文贵认为这是假的，那可以让他来告我。
Documents provided by Wang reveal that the protests were part of a so-called operation to eradicate thieves. There's a list of potential targets from all over the world, many of them Chinese dissidents or former supporters of Guo. Each protester was to receive an allowance of up to $300 a day.
有一些人就是奔着那个一天100、200的补助来的，那个时候人就比较多了。
There are also detailed instructions for what to do during a protest.
统一着装，保持纪律，然后啊，对方进行骚扰、辱骂，然后呢，能够最好有肢体接触，该出手是出手。
On his live streams and in private chat groups, Guo issued messages egging his supporters on.
揭发这些欺民贼在西方的卧底，对西方民主法治的伤害，对新中国联邦爆料革命的伤害。
He constantly reminded supporters to act lawfully, but also promised to help if things went wrong.
依法灭贼的成员啊，这个除了标准配备受到依法保护啊，受到这个任何伤害，法治社会法人都应该去保护他们。
共产党的走狗。
With that assurance in mind, Wang organized his first protests for Guo in Los Angeles. The target was Mang Liuzi, a YouTuber he'd never met before. As they confronted each other, Mang Liuzi reached for Wang's mask.
在这里。
Wang says Guo sent out this message shortly after.
你看那盲流的那个样，那个垃圾，你看那个破房子，哎呀！
In it, he referred to Wang by his nickname Qi Chang.
挺呛的，就被人家摸脸了，都没敢还手。哎呀，持枪啊！
Later in the day, things got even uglier.
你不要摘我口罩吗？来来，摘这口罩是怎么的？
哎呀！
Guo issued a string of messages following the incident, many of them praising Wang.
他是真是火了，他是生气了。那一会儿里边，他有点那种不顾的劲儿出来了，就持枪从第一天出来那个二劲儿，这回今天全用上去了。这兄弟够可爱的，真够可爱的。
今天我们去法院，关于盲流子的这个案件，今天有出庭。
Wang is now facing charges of assault. Initially, he says, Guo's organization provided him with a lawyer and $20,000 in legal fees. But that money's since run out, and he now has a public defender.
后来这个郭骗子集团不给我律师费，后续的什么生活补助啊，他们答应的这些都没有。
He could go to jail. But Wang believes he's done nothing wrong.
就是 就在这对面啊。
When COVID-19 gripped the world in early 2020, Guo and his associates started speaking extensively about the strange new virus.
全人类到现在都在干着一件事儿，别把病染自己身上。只有中国想办法让这个病传遍全世界。
Thousands tuned in, including this woman who we will call Lily. Lily had many questions about the pandemic. Guo seemed to have all the answers.
There's never gonna be the vaccine. It's never been developed, and only Moscow has the truth, and he has the cure, which is to take down the Chinese Communist Party.
On social media, Guo and other affiliated influencers also warned of an impending economic collapse and food shortages.
油价很贵，粮食现在能买得着吗？你买试试去。
At the first, I stocked 2 25-pound bags of rice, and then later I thought that was not good enough. And then I got another 6 bags, so totally 200 pounds of rice. Once you're brainwashed, you're not able to think and you're not able to be rational.
Like any other cult.
Lily wasn't alone though. For 2 years, this former supporter devoted large chunks of his time working as a volunteer translator for Guo. We'll call him TC.
He was so convincing that all the negative reporting on him was fabricated by CCP, right? And I was naive enough to believe him. It's just like a cult.
Both Lily and TC were committed members of the whistleblower movement when Guo announced during the pandemic that he was launching several new ventures. Media company GTV and cryptocurrencies Gcoin and Gdollar. These were promoted as good stores of value and therefore smart investments during periods of uncertainty.
That time, right, that's in the beginning of the pandemic. So everything seems to be following a grand plan that he knows. So made his whatever claim more believable.
Lily says supporters were encouraged to earn the right to invest in the projects, first by donating to the Rule of Law Foundation and then by working as volunteers for the movement.
The more work you do, the more coin you're able to buy. So it is like you work for free and the only thing you gain is to lose more money.
Lily decided not to invest. She says she was then told her services as a volunteer were no longer required.
I feel I'm a loser. But after I was listening to some other people, I realized it's a scam and it's extremely lucky I get out of it.
TC made 2 significant investments, but quickly realized something was wrong.
After I sent out the fund, I never got one word back. Yeah, forget about the receipt. There's no email, no message, nothing.
In Washington, D.C., Sasha Gong learnt about the alleged scam when she started getting calls for help.
This young girl said she invested $40,000 there, she was cheated, and she doesn't know what to do now. And then later, some other people came to me. I said, you guys, you got to report to FBI and SEC.
In September 2021, the US Securities and Exchange Commission charged 3 companies linked to Guo with illegal offerings of stock and digital assets. The companies neither admitted nor denied the findings, but agreed to pay more than $500 million to settle the action.
It's a great scheme for a scam. He took advantage of a lot of people, and it really hurts. Now people realize that they really cannot believe in anyone anymore.
Guo did not respond to our multiple requests for an interview or comment. It's clear he is a busy man. 2 months after the SEC ruling, he started promoting a new cryptocurrency. He's also battling a raft of lawsuits. In February, a judge ordered him to pay a $134 million fine for moving his yacht out of the United States in violation of a court order. Guo filed for bankruptcy shortly after. Since being kicked out of the whistleblower movement, Zhuang Lihong has been trying to rebuild his life. He says he's given up fighting for democracy.
我真的为了郭文贵做了很多事情，付出了自己的时间和精力以及金钱，而且都是不图回报的。我觉得他真是利用了我们这些对自由民主追求的人的这么一个信仰，一个天真的心，